It started with a single text message that felt like a punch to the gut. "Hey Ava, the guest list is finalized. We had to make some tough cuts. Hope you understand. Love you. Tough cuts." Those 2 words burned into my screen. I read them again and again until they blurred into meaningless shapes. My sister Haley, the girl I once shared a bedroom with, the one whose college dorm I decorated, whose heart I patched up after every heartbreak, was cutting me from her wedding like I was some random acquaintance. The disbelief sat heavy in my chest, thick and sour. I actually laughed for a second, a short, humorless sound, because there was no way this could be real. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her tone bright, casual. "Oh, hi, sweetheart. How's work?" I skipped the small talk. "Mom, I just got a message from Haley. She said the guest list is finalized and I'm not invited." "What's going on?" The pause on the other end told me everything. "Oh, honey," she sighed, that soft, condescending tone she used whenever she wanted to make me feel childish. "It's just a wedding. Don't make this a big deal. Just a wedding." The phrase sliced through me sharper than anything else she could have said. "Are you serious right now? I'm her sister? You know how weddings are, Ava. They had to make some tough choices. Budgets and all that." "Budgets?" I asked, my voice trembling between anger and disbelief. "Mom, she's having it in Napa Valley. She invited 150 people. I saw the post. She even added that influencer she met once at a yoga retreat." There was a forced chuckle on the line. "Well, maybe she assumed you wouldn't mind skipping this one." "Wouldn't mind?" The phrase echoed like an insult. I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "Wouldn't mind?" I repeated, my tone low and shaking. "I've been there for her every step of her life, Mom. I helped her move apartments. I covered her rent when she lost her job. I held her while she cried after her last breakup. But I can't even be at her wedding." "Oh, Ava," my mother said with that weary sigh, the one that always made me feel like a burden. "Stop being dramatic. You know your sister loves you. Don't ruin her big day over something so small." Something so small. That did it. I could feel the familiar heat in my stomach, that coil of anger I'd learned to swallow my entire life. The kind of heat that came from years of being the reliable one, the fixer, the one who didn't need attention because I could handle myself. I was always the one asked to understand, to forgive, to let things go. Haley could get away with anything. She once crashed my car and cried her way out of it, and Mom bought her new tires for it. Me, I got a lecture about responsibility. I swallowed hard, my jaw tight. "You know what, Mom, you're right. It's just a wedding. I won't ruin it." "Good girl," she said, relieved. "Now promise you'll be supportive. Maybe send a nice card." I didn't answer. I ended the call instead. For a while, I just sat there, staring out the window of my Seattle apartment. The city was washed in gray and drizzle, the kind of day that made your thoughts louder. I should have cried. I should have screamed. But instead, I felt empty, like someone had quietly erased me from my own family portrait. My phone buzzed again, lighting up with Haley's Instagram notification. A new post. I opened it. There she was, smiling in her bridal gown at the fitting, surrounded by her bridesmaids. The caption read, "Can't wait to celebrate with everyone who truly matters. Everyone who truly matters." Something inside me snapped, not loudly but cleanly, like a rope finally giving way after years of strain. I leaned back in my chair, the bitterness finally turning into something steadier, colder. "Fine," I whispered. "If I'm not worth an invitation, I'm not worth the guilt either." My fiancé Ethan was in the kitchen when I walked in. He looked up from his laptop, his dark hair slightly tousled, concern written all over his face. "You okay?" I told him. Everything, every word, every sigh from Mom, every cruelly casual sentence. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes steady on mine. When I finished, he closed his laptop and said quietly, "Then don't go." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't let them have that power over you. If they don't want you there, let them have their perfect little day. You deserve better. You deserve peace." Peace. The word landed soft but powerful. I can't just sit here, I murmured. I don't know. Space. Ethan smiled faintly. Then let's take it. You've been talking about Bali for years. Let's actually go. I hesitated. Bali. It sounded like a dream too luxurious for someone like me, the responsible one who always stayed home to help. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Why should I stay here feeling small and unwanted, when I could be somewhere warm, free, far away from their toxic family dynamics? That night, I opened my laptop and searched Bali Resort's all-inclusive ocean view. Each image that popped up felt like a promise. Golden beaches, lush jungles, infinity pools that melted into the horizon. For once, it wasn't about running away, it was about running toward myself. I scrolled until I found one that made my breath catch. Karma Lotus Retreat, the name read. Irony at its finest. I booked it. 2 tickets, 1 ocean villa, departure in 4 days. When the confirmation email arrived, I stared at it with a strange calm. I wasn't going to cry over being excluded. I wasn't going to beg for inclusion. I was done trying to belong to a family that only called when they needed fixing. The next morning I woke up early, made coffee, and stood on the balcony overlooking the damp Seattle skyline. For the first time in years, I didn't check my messages. I didn't scroll through family group chats or wonder what they were saying about me. Instead, I opened my planner and crossed out one date in red ink: Haley's wedding, Napa Valley. Next to it, I wrote a single word in bold: Bali. The rain began to fall harder outside, tapping against the glass in rhythmic defiance. I smiled faintly watching it, letting that sound wash over the last bit of guilt still clinging to me. If my family wanted a wedding without me, they could have it. Because this time, I wasn't going to chase their approval. I was going to chase the Sunday. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain sliding down the windows. Seattle had a way of matching your mood whether you wanted it to or not. The city was gray, heavy, and still. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, feeling the dull ache of last night settle in. On my phone, the text from Haley still sat on the screen, those 2 words that wouldn't stop echoing in my head. Tough cuts. In the kitchen, Ethan was already awake, standing by the counter with his sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He glanced over his shoulder and smiled softly. You're up early. I tried to smile back. Couldn't sleep. He handed me a cup, the smell of roasted beans filling the silence. Still thinking about it, I nodded. I don't even know why it hurts this much. It's just one event, right? He leaned against the counter, eyes steady. It's not about the event. It's about what it means. I took a sip, the bitterness cutting through my fog. It means I've spent years helping her, supporting her, and apparently that doesn't mean a damn thing. He watched me carefully. You've always been the one who fixes things, Ava. Maybe it's time to stop fixing people who keep breaking you. That hit deeper than I wanted to admit. I stared at the raindrops racing each other down the glass. I don't even know how to stop, he shrugged. Maybe you start by leaving. Leaving. Ethan's voice softened, calm but firm. You don't have to stay in a place that hurts you. You can step out, even for a little while. I laughed, though it came out hollow. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, he said, but it's freedom. I turned the words over in my head like smooth stones. Freedom. It sounded foreign on my tongue, like something that belonged to other people. If I go, they'll call me selfish. He met my eyes. They already do. Might as well enjoy it. I couldn't help smiling at that. Ethan had a way of cutting through everything, of seeing the truth without judgment. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm and steady. You deserve peace, Ava. Real peace. Not the kind you earn by being quiet while everyone else talks over you. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the steady hum of rain outside. Finally, I whispered, if she could plan a wedding without me, maybe I can plan a life without her. Ethan squeezed my hand. Now that's the spirit. That afternoon, while he took a call for work, I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before typing Bali all-inclusive resorts. The images that filled my screen were like another world: turquoise water, sunlit rice terraces, golden beaches. The air itself looked warmer through the photos. Every click felt like another breath of fresh air. One photo stopped me. A white villa nestled against a cliffside overlooking a stretch of endless ocean. The name read Karma Lotus Retreat. I let out a small laugh. Of all the names. I scrolled through the pictures: private pool, candlelit dinners, spa with open-air views. Each one whispered the same thing: escape. Ethan came over, glancing at the screen. That looks unreal. I was just looking. Book it. I blinked at him. What? He smiled. You need something that's just yours. You've spent your whole life living for everyone else. Let's go somewhere that's just for you. I stared at him for a moment, heart pounding with something between fear and excitement. Are you serious completely? I scrolled down to the booking form. Flights leave Friday. Perfect. My hands trembled slightly as I typed in my information. Every field I filled felt like breaking one more invisible chain. When the confirmation page appeared, a wave of calm washed over me. I wasn't running away, I was choosing myself. That evening, I stood by the window as the rain slowed to a mist. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement below. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. How does it feel? Strange, I admitted. Like I just ended a long argument I didn't know I was having. He rested his chin on my shoulder. That's what peace feels like. My phone buzzed on the table. A new message from Mom. Are you really skipping your sister's wedding over this? I stared at it for a long time. For once, I didn't feel that familiar rush of guilt or obligation. I just felt tired. I set the phone down without replying. Later that night, I opened Instagram and uploaded a photo: a cup of coffee, raindrops on the window, a soft caption beneath it. When one door closes, another opens to somewhere warmer. Within minutes, Lydia reacted with a heart emoji and a comment. Take me with you next time. Mom texted again. Ava, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Haley didn't reply, but I saw her story: wedding decor, champagne glasses, the caption, surrounded by the people who truly matter. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that. I whispered to myself, then be surrounded. I'll survive. The next few days passed in quiet preparation. I folded sundresses, sandals, a wide-brimmed hat I hadn't worn in years. Each item felt like a small rebellion. I printed the flight confirmation, tucked it inside my passport, and zipped the suitcase shut. Ethan watched from the doorway, smiling. You're really doing it. Yeah, I said, glancing back at the rain-streaked window. I'm really doing it. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around me. Tomorrow you'll wake up somewhere the rain can't reach you. I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. For the first time in years, the sound didn't compete with the storm of thoughts. That night, I didn't scroll through my family's group chat. I didn't check their posts. I just turned my phone face down on the nightstand. The silence was comforting. Before bed, I wrote one sentence in my planner under the date of Haley's wedding. Instead of a ceremony, I choose serenity. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds. No rain, no cold gray sky, just the soft promise of something new. I zipped up my suitcase, grabbed my passport, and glanced at the empty space on my dresser where my phone usually sat charging. I smiled, leaving it there. When I walked out the door, the city air smelled of damp earth and fresh beginnings. For once, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I was chasing the Sunday. The rain followed us all the way to the airport, streaking across the car windows like faint reminders of everything I was leaving behind. Seattle looked gray and indifferent, as if it didn't care whether I stayed or disappeared. Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand. You okay? I nodded, though my stomach was tight. Yeah, just weird. It's not weird, he said gently. It's a goodbye. Inside the terminal, the fluorescent lights were too bright. People dragged suitcases, couples argued softly, kids ran in circles near the gate. Life moved forward without noticing heartbreak. As the boarding call echoed through the speakers, I took one last glance at the drizzle outside. Somewhere in Napa Valley, my family would be rehearsing toasts, arranging flowers, pretending everything was perfect. Ethan leaned close, whispering, "You ready?" I inhaled and exhaled slowly. Ready. As the plane lifted off the city, shrank beneath the clouds. I watched the rooftops blur, then disappear altogether. For a fleeting moment, it felt like all the noise, the guilt, the resentment, everything stayed down there, shrinking into nothing. Hours later, sunlight spilled through the window as we crossed oceans. The blue below was endless. Ethan glanced at me, smiling. "You look lighter. Maybe I am." "Some goodbyes," he said, "don't need closure. They just need distance." When the plane landed in Bali, the world felt like it had changed. The doors opened to thick, warm air, laced with the scent of salt and frangipani. Outside, the sky glowed a deep tangerine, and even the humidity seemed to welcome us. A driver waited with a sign that read Miss Morgan, Karma Lotus Retreat. I couldn't help but laugh. Of course it's called Karma. Ethan grinned. Seems fitting. The drive to the resort took nearly an hour, winding through narrow roads bordered by rice fields and temples. Women in colorful sarongs carried offerings balanced perfectly on their heads. Children waved from porches. Every turn revealed another slice of peace I hadn't known I was missing. At one point, Ethan reached over, lowering the car window so the breeze poured in. "Smell that, flowers. And ocean. And freedom," he said softly. I smiled, eyes tracing the horizon where palm trees met sky. Back home, I always felt like an afterthought. Here I feel present. He squeezed my hand. "You are." When we arrived at Karma Lotus, it felt like stepping into another realm. The entrance was lined with floating candles and white petals. Soft gamelan music drifted through the open lobby. A woman with a calm smile placed a garland of fresh jasmine around my neck. "Welcome home, Miss Morgan," she said. Home. I nearly laughed. For the first time, the word didn't sting. Our villa sat high above the ocean with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private infinity pool that seemed to melt into the sea. As soon as we walked in, I dropped my bag and just stood there staring out at the horizon. The sound of waves filled the silence. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Worth the flight. More than worth it," I whispered. We unpacked slowly, neither of us rushing. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the water in gold. Ethan ordered cocktails from room service, and we sat by the pool sipping from tall glasses as the sky turned lavender. "You know," he said, swirling his drink, "I've never seen you this quiet. Good quiet or bad quiet, the peaceful kind." I smiled faintly. I don't think I've ever had that kind before. Later, we had dinner by the shore, fresh grilled fish, candlelight flickering in the breeze, the sound of laughter from nearby tables. The waiter asked if we were celebrating a honeymoon. Ethan smirked. "Something like that." I raised my glass. "To new beginnings. To peace," he added. The clink of glass felt final, like sealing a pact with myself. After dinner, we walked barefoot along the sand. The air was thick and soft, the moon hanging low over the water. For a long time, we didn't talk. There was nothing to fix, nothing to explain. Just the rhythm of waves against the shore and the quiet realization that, for once, I was allowed to exist without proving my worth. When we got back to the villa, I stepped out onto the balcony. The ocean stretched infinitely black and shimmering. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, barefoot hair, tousled by salt wind, eyes calm. Back in Seattle, I used to dread silence because it left space for doubt. Here, silence felt like truth. Ethan came out wrapping a shawl around my shoulders. "Penny, for your thoughts," I exhaled, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I used to think happiness was something you earned. Now I think it's something you claim." He kissed the top of my head. "Then claim it." I leaned into him, closing my eyes as the waves filled the night. When I finally went inside, my phone buzzed. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Then curiosity got the better of me. It was a notification from Haley's Instagram. A new post. Her rehearsal dinner. She stood surrounded by bridesmaids, champagne in hand, captioned, "Can't wait to celebrate with everyone who truly matters." I felt a flicker in my chest, but it wasn't pain. It was recognition of what I'd finally outgrown. I set the phone down and whispered, "Have your celebration. I'll have mine." The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains. I woke to the sound of birds, the scent of sea breeze, and Ethan already out by the pool, coffee in hand. "Morning," he said. "You slept in. I think my body finally realized it's allowed to rest." He smiled. "Ready for your first day in paradise?" "Absolutely." We spent the morning exploring the resort breakfast with fresh fruit and pancakes, a slow walk along the garden paths, the occasional sound of monks chanting in the distance. Every detail felt alive, the colors sharper, the air sweeter. At the spa, a woman pressed warm stones along my back and I nearly drifted to sleep. The therapist whispered, "You hold too much here," pressing gently at my shoulders. "I know," I murmured. "Let it go," she said. And for once, I did. That afternoon we lounged by the infinity pool, our feet dangling over the edge. Ethan handed me a cold drink. Still thinking about them, I hesitated. Maybe a little. "But it's different now. It doesn't hurt," he nodded. "That's how you know you're healing." I gazed out at the ocean waves shimmering like glass. "Do you think they're talking about me?" he chuckled. "Probably. But they don't define the story anymore." The thought settled warmly inside me. When the sun began to set, I took out my phone, snapped a picture of the horizon, and posted it with a single line, "When you choose peace, the world looks different." Within minutes, hearts and comments appeared. Lydia wrote, "You look happy, cousin. Keep shining." I smiled, closing the app. I didn't post for validation. I posted because I finally had something worth sharing. Stillness. As night fell, I stood on the balcony again, barefoot on the cool tile. The moon hung over the water, reflecting on the surface like a quiet promise. Back home, they were probably clinking glasses, posing for perfect photos, keeping up appearances. But for once, I didn't envy them. I didn't wish I was part of that picture. Ethan came up beside me. "What's on your mind?" "Nothing," I said softly. "And that's the best part." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Let's keep it that way." We stood there until the last trace of light disappeared into the sea. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's shadow. I felt like sunlight. The morning light slipped through the curtains, warm and golden, scattering across the villa's marble floor. The air smelled faintly of coffee and sea salt. I stretched, feeling my muscles loosen, and for the first time in a long time, my chest wasn't heavy. The ocean was calm beyond the glass doors, glittering like a field of silver. Ethan was already awake, sitting on the edge of the pool with a book in his hands. When he looked up, the sunlight caught the corner of his smile. "You're smiling," he said. "I am," he nodded. "You look lighter. I like this version of you." I sat beside him, dipping my toes into the water. "So do I." The waves crashed faintly below the cliffs. A few birds glided overhead, their reflections skimming across the surface of the infinity pool. The morning was so perfect it almost felt unreal. "I didn't plan to make a statement," I said, quietly watching the horizon. "But peace, it turns out, can be louder than revenge." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're poetic before breakfast. I guess Bali does that to people." He laughed softly. "Or maybe it's just doing it to you." After breakfast, I wandered out to the patio. The sea stretched endlessly ahead, a canvas of shifting blues. I took out my phone, turned it toward the view, and snapped a picture. The composition was almost two perfect legs, stretched out on the lounger, cocktail in hand, the ocean glowing in the background. The caption came to me instantly. "Guess I got cut from the guest list, but I think I'll survive." I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering above post. Ethan noticed and leaned over. "You sure you want to do that?" "Absolutely," I said, tapping the screen. "I'm not saying anything untrue." The picture went live, and for a few seconds the only sound was the distant crash of waves. Then the notifications started. Likes, comments, laughing emojis. Lydia commented first. Now, that's the kind of guest list I want to be on. A college friend wrote, "Good for you, Ava. Live your best life." Even an old coworker chimed in, "You look incredible. Where is this?" I scrolled through the comments, half amused, half defiant. Haley had seen the post. Her name appeared briefly among the views, but there was no comment from her. No message either. Ethan came over with 2 glasses of fresh juice. "You know that might cause some noise." I took a sip and smiled. "Then, let them talk. It's the first time I've given them something worth talking about." My phone buzzed again. A message from Mom. "Are you seriously missing your sister's wedding for this?" Then another. "You're being ridiculous, Ava. This isn't who you are." I put the phone down on the table and let out a quiet laugh. Of course that's what she'd say. "What did she say?" Ethan asked. "Exactly what I expected. You're not going to answer." "No," I said. "I'm finally learning that not answering is an answer." He reached out and brushed his thumb over the back of my hand. "Good. Protect your peace." We spent the rest of the morning walking along the beach. The sand was warm beneath our feet, the waves curling gently against our ankles. Small crabs darted across the shore. Every sound, every movement felt like proof that the world was still big and beautiful, even when family drama tried to make it small. Ethan stopped at a beachside cafe, ordering us iced coconut water. "You seem deep in thought," he said. I stared out at the horizon. I was just remembering when I used to think being quiet was the same as being kind. He tilted his head. "And now I think silence can be strength, especially when it's the kind that says, 'I don't owe you my pain.'" He smiled at that. "That's the Ava I like." By the time we returned to the villa, the sun had shifted high overhead. I showered, changed into a white dress, and stepped out to the terrace again. Ethan joined me with his laptop, checking emails while I scrolled through my phone. Mom had texted 3 more times. "This isn't healthy. You're hurting the family. Haley is disappointed in you." I read them all, and then deleted them without replying. That evening, we dined at a small restaurant by the water, surrounded by lanterns that swayed gently in the breeze. The tables were draped in linen, the air rich with the scent of lemongrass and grilled fish. The waiter smiled politely as he poured wine into our glasses. "Honeymoon?" he asked. Ethan glanced at me with a teasing grin. "Something like that." I raised my glass toward him. "To the family who forgot me," I said softly, "and to the woman who finally remembered herself." He touched his glass to mine. "To that." We ate slowly, savoring the flavors, the sweet chili glaze, the citrusy notes of the wine. Around us, laughter and soft music mixed with the sound of waves. I realized then how different it felt to exist in a place where no one expected me to play a part. I wasn't the responsible sister or the emotional anchor. I was just Ava sitting under lantern light free. After dinner, we took a walk along the beach. The sky was painted with stars, and the moon cast a silver path over the water. A few couples walked hand in hand nearby, their laughter carrying on the wind. Ethan slipped his fingers through mine. "Do you think they're talking about you right now?" he asked. "Probably." I smiled. "They've always needed something to whisper about." He laughed. "And how does that feel? Strangely good." We sat down near the water, watching the tide creep up and retreat again. I took a slow breath and said, "I think I used to believe that love meant staying no matter how it hurt. Now I think it means knowing when to walk away." Ethan nodded. "That's not selfish, Ava. That's survival." When we returned to the villa, I saw a dozen missed calls on my phone. The last one was from Mom again. For a moment, I almost felt guilty. Then I remembered the sound of her sigh the night she told me, "It's just a wedding." I pressed the side button and turned the phone to silent. Outside, the waves murmured against the cliffs. The moonlight poured into the room, washing everything in silver. I stepped onto the balcony one last time before bed, taking in the view, the endless ocean, the faint hum of life below the stars above. I whispered into the night, Sometimes being left out is the best gift life gives you. The phone buzzed again, but I didn't look. I let it vibrate against the table until it stopped. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Can't sleep, I'm not trying to," I said. "I just want to remember this feeling." He rested his chin on my shoulder. "What feeling?" "The kind where I don't owe anyone anything." He kissed my temple. "Hold on to it." I looked out over the ocean one last time, the waves glowing faintly in the moonlight. Back home, my family was probably laughing, posing for photos, pretending everything was perfect. But for the first time, I didn't feel excluded. I felt liberated. As I turned to go inside, I whispered to myself, "If they wanted my silence, they're about to hear it loud and clear." And then I closed the door to the sound of waves, carrying only peace into my sleep. The morning sunlight drifted through the sheer curtains, soft and gold. The smell of coffee filled the room, mingling with the sound of waves brushing the rocks below. I rolled over half, expecting my phone to be quiet, but it wasn't. It pulsed on the nightstand, vibrating every few seconds. Notifications stacked like falling dominoes, messages, comments, unread emails. Ethan stirred beside me, one eye open. "You're famous now," he murmured, voice still rough from sleep. I groaned and reached for the phone. "Don't even start." He sat up, smiling lazily. Regretting that post, yet I scrolled through the flood of reactions. Not even a little. Lydia's comment was pinned to the top, "You've officially started a family war." I snorted. She's not wrong. Underneath were a few laughing emojis, some supportive messages, and one that stood out, a private DM from Mom. "Ava, call me right now. This has gone too far." I stared at the words, a slow exhale leaving my chest. They really don't get it. Ethan took a sip of his coffee. "Peace can be provocative when people are used to chaos." "That's true." I tossed the phone aside and stood up. "Well, let the war rage on. I'm having breakfast." Downstairs, the restaurant overlooked the ocean. The morning breeze carried the scent of mango and salt. Ethan and I ordered fruit platters and pancakes, and for a while the only sound was the clinking of forks and the call of seabirds. But curiosity got the better of me. I checked my phone again, scrolling through the messages that had come overnight. "Mom, your sister's hurt." "Mom again, you're being petty, Ava." And another, "You'll regret this when it's too late." A familiar ache stirred in my chest, but it wasn't pain, it was recognition. This was how she'd always tried to reel me back in. I turned the screen toward Ethan. "They're trying guilt now." He nodded knowingly. "You've always been their emotional glue. They panic when it stops sticking." I laughed softly, shaking my head. Maybe they need to fall apart. Maybe that's the only way they'll ever see how much I held them together. He leaned back in his chair, watching me with quiet admiration. "There's my Ava." Later that afternoon, we walked along the beach. The sun beat warm against my skin, the tide rolling in with lazy rhythm. For once, I felt entirely present. No deadlines, no phone calls, no expectations waiting on the other side of guilt. Still, a tiny part of me whispered, "What if they're right? What if I'm being selfish?" Ethan must have read my face, because he said softly, "You're allowed to be the main character in your own life. That doesn't make you selfish, it makes you human." I stopped walking and looked at him. "Part of me still wants to be missed, you know. To matter." He nodded. "Of course you do. Everyone wants to be missed. But you don't need to destroy your peace to prove your worth." I smiled faintly. "That's going on a pillow someday." We walked in silence again, waves brushing our ankles, the sun dipping lower toward the horizon. That evening, I sat by the pool with a glass of wine. The water shimmered orange and pink, reflecting the sky. Ethan joined me, handing over his phone. "Lydia texted me. Says your mom's losing her mind." I raised an eyebrow. "Why is she texting you?" "She figured I was the only one you'd listen to." I rolled my eyes but unlocked my phone anyway. Sure enough, Lydia had sent a message. "You're trending in our family chat. Grandma says you're the only one with sense." That made me laugh out loud. Finally, someone noticed. "Haley's furious," Lydia continued. "She said you stole attention from her wedding by going on vacation." I read it twice, stunned, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh. How ironic. She excluded me to be the center of attention and still can't stand that I'm not there. Ethan chuckled. Poetic justice. I typed back, tell Grandma I love her. And tell Haley the Wi-Fi here's terrible so I can't fix her feelings from across the world. Lydia replied with a string of laughing emojis. You didn't abandon the family, Ava. You just stopped being their punching bag. That line lingered in my head long after I put the phone down. The wind picked up rustling through the palm leaves. For years I'd been the buffer, the peacekeeper, the responsible one. Every fight, every crisis, they all ended with the same thing: Ava will handle it. But this time I didn't, and the world didn't end. When night came, we wandered down to a small bar on the beach. Lanterns glowed overhead, casting pools of golden light across the sand. A guitarist played slow, wistful music in the corner. Ethan ordered 2 mojitos, and we sat watching the tide roll in. You ever think about what you'll say if they ask you to come back? He asked. I smiled, swirling the mint leaves with my straw. I think I'd say I'm busy. Busy doing what living. He grinned. That's a good answer. After a pause, he said, You know you never really got revenge. I turned to him. Didn't I? I'm happy. That's enough. He raised his glass. To happiness is payback. I clinked mine against his. To peace that burns brighter than anger. We drank in silence, watching the waves shimmer under the moonlight. My reflection danced in the glass, sunburnt shoulders, relaxed eyes, a woman I almost didn't recognize. Back in Seattle, I used to count peace as something I had to earn through forgiveness. Here, it just existed. I didn't have to ask permission for it. When we returned to the villa, the night air was cool. The ocean hummed faintly beyond the balcony. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone one last time before turning it off. Mom had texted again. Haley says she's sorry you feel hurt. I laughed bitterly. Not sorry for what she did, just sorry I noticed. Without replying, I opened Instagram and posted a single story, a video of the ocean waves lapping against the shore, with the caption, "Sometimes walking away is louder than staying." Within minutes, the views started climbing. Haley's name appeared near the top. Ethan walked out of the bathroom, towel around his shoulders. You're posting again, just something small. He shook his head with a smile. You know this is driving them crazy, right? I know. I lay back on the bed, smiling at the ceiling. And that's the best part. I didn't have to say a word. He laughed, turning off the lights. You're terrifying in the most graceful way. Thanks, I said, yawning. I learned from the best karma. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across the sheets, my phone silent for once. I felt rested, free, weightless. Ethan was already outside, leaning against the railing, watching the waves. He turned as I joined him. Sleep well, better than I have in years. He handed me a cup of coffee. You realize it's her wedding day tomorrow. I took a slow sip and smiled. Let them have their champagne. I'll have my peace. And for the first time, I truly meant it. The morning light was almost too bright. I blinked as it spilled across the white sheets, soft but relentless, painting the walls gold. The sound of the waves outside was steady, unhurried. Somewhere beyond the open balcony, someone was playing soft gamelan music. I turned over, half smiling, as the realization hit me. Today was the wedding day. For a moment I lay still, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above. The thought of Haley walking down an aisle somewhere in Napa Valley should have hurt. But it didn't. Not anymore. Ethan appeared in the doorway, barefoot and shirtless, holding 2 cups of espresso. Good morning, Mrs. Not Invited, he teased. I laughed, stretching. Don't remind me. He handed me a cup. So what's on your agenda today? I took a sip, the bitter warmth spreading through my chest. Let's see. Pancakes, ocean, maybe forgiveness. He grinned. In that order, exactly. Outside, the world was impossibly vivid, the sky so blue it hurt to look at, the scent of hibiscus thick in the air. We had breakfast on the terrace overlooking the sea, coconut pancakes drizzled with honey, slices of dragon fruit glistening under the sunlight. Ethan clinked his fork against my plate. To your sister's big day, he said playfully. I raised my mimosa. And to my freedom day. We laughed, but beneath the humor there was truth. It felt like I'd escaped something invisible yet suffocating. I had spent my entire life orbiting around my family's moods. Now, for once, the center was mine. After breakfast, we walked down to the beach. The sand was warm, soft between our toes. The tide curled and receded with lazy rhythm, the ocean gleaming like glass. I could see the resort's infinity pool above the cliffs where we'd been just hours ago, small and distant now, as if that version of me, the tired, dutiful daughter, had been left behind there. Do you ever wonder if they're thinking about you right now? Ethan asked. Oh, definitely, I said, brushing hair out of my face, probably overanalyzing my captions. He laughed. You're evil. Peacefully evil, I corrected. We waded into the shallow water, the waves cool against our legs. I tilted my face up to the sun, closing my eyes. It was almost too much beauty to take in at once, the light, the wind, the freedom of not being needed. Back home, I imagined Mom, bustling around, trying to keep guests entertained, her smile brittle. Haley posing for pictures, pretending the day was perfect. The thought didn't sting anymore. It almost felt like watching strangers in a movie. By noon, we'd returned to the resort for a spa appointment. The massage room smelled of lemongrass and sea salt. The therapist's hands moved gently but with purpose. You hold tension here, she murmured, pressing my shoulders. I know, I said, voice muffled through the towel. Let it go, she whispered. I did. When it was over, I stepped outside, wrapped in a soft robe, my skin glowing, my body light. Ethan was waiting near the pool, already lounging with a drink. You look like someone who just deleted 100 family contacts, he said. Better, I replied. Like someone who doesn't need to. We spent the rest of the afternoon lying in the sun, half dozing, half talking. He told me stories about his childhood, small moments of rebellion and laughter. I told him about mine, about the invisible expectations, the constant comparisons, the feeling of being the designated adult since I was 10. You know what's funny, I said, watching the horizon. I thought helping everyone made me strong, but I was just keeping their weaknesses comfortable. Ethan nodded slowly. Strength isn't fixing what people break on purpose. That stayed with me. Later, as the light softened, we took a slow walk along the beach. The sky was turning shades of peach and violet, the waves brushing our ankles. They're probably walking down the aisle right about now, Ethan said. I smiled. Let them. I'm already married to Peace. He laughed, pulling me closer. You and Peace make a great couple. The resort staff had set up a few tables by the shore for dinner. The smell of grilled seafood mingled with the ocean air. We ordered champagne, and when it arrived, the bubbles caught the sunset light like tiny stars. I lifted my glass. Funny how champagne tastes sweeter when you're not pretending. Ethan tilted his head. Pretending you know, pretending everything's fine. Pretending you're not hurt. Pretending you belong somewhere you clearly don't. He raised his glass. Here's to no more pretending. We toasted as the sky deepened into orange and pink. The sound of laughter from other tables drifted around us. I looked out at the sea and thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. When the stars began to appear, we stayed a while longer, talking about everything and nothing. A gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine. The world felt wide open. Back in the villa, I stood on the balcony while Ethan cleaned up. The moon reflected perfectly on the water, a silver coin tossed into infinity. My phone buzzed faintly on the table. I ignored it, for a while. Then curiosity got the better of me. There were 12 missed calls. Mom, Haley, Aunt Lisa, even Lydia. My heart gave a small, curious flutter. That's weird, I said. Ethan poked his head out from the bathroom. What's wrong? Nothing really. Just a lot of calls. He frowned. Do you want to check? Not tonight, I said, setting the phone face down. They'll survive without me. He nodded, trusting that answer. We climbed into bed, the soft hum of the ocean filling the silence. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. I used to think peace was something that came after the chaos, I whispered. But maybe it's something you choose right in the middle of it. He brushed my hair back, his voice low. You chose it perfectly. I smiled against his skin. I just hope it lasts. Peace always lasts, he said, half asleep. It's people who don't. I lay there long after he drifted off, staring at the faint shimmer of moonlight on the floor. The waves rolled in, unbothered, endless. I thought about the messages I hadn't opened, the voices I hadn't heard. Somewhere far away in a winery full of flowers and forced smiles, a family that had pushed me aside was probably falling apart in slow motion. And yet here, everything was still. I whispered into the dark, almost like a prayer. Let them have their wedding. I'll have my peace. The ocean answered back in its own rhythm, steady and patient, as if to say, I already did. The first vibrations startled me out of a dream. Then came the second, and the third. The sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand broke through the calm rhythm of waves outside. For a moment, I thought it was just the alarm. But when I opened my eyes, the screen was glowing bright against the darkness, my name reflected in dozens of missed calls. Ethan stirred beside me, his voice low and sleepy. What time is it? I squinted at the screen. Almost 2. He rubbed his eyes. Who's calling? I sighed, scrolling through the list. Mom, Haley, Aunt Lisa, even Uncle Rob, all since midnight. He blinked slowly. Guess the wedding hangover's hitting early. I laughed softly, though unease was beginning to stir in my stomach. They probably just want to make sure I feel guilty one last time. The phone buzzed again. Another call, Mom, this time. I turned it face down and slid it across the table. Not tonight, I murmured. Not ever again. Ethan reached for my hand, warm and reassuring. They'll tire themselves out. I hope so. But they didn't. By morning, my notifications had exploded. I woke to the sound of the ocean sunlight glinting off the water and a phone screen so full of missed messages it looked like static. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat on the balcony, and scrolled. The first message was from Mom. Call me. It's an emergency. The second from Lydia. You won't believe what just happened. Then one from Jake, my cousin on Dad's side, whom I hadn't heard from in years. Holy hell, your sister's wedding blew up. I frowned. Blew up? Ethan walked out with his coffee hair still messy. What's going on? I have no idea. I opened another text from Aunt Lisa. The groom left. It's a disaster. Everyone's freaking out. I blinked, then laughed loud enough for a few birds nearby to scatter. You've got to be kidding me. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The groom left, apparently. I scrolled further. The group chat was chaos, half the family shouting in capital letters, the other half trying to calm them down. Words like embarrassment, ruined, and call Ava popped up over and over. I set the phone down, shaking my head. Karma's got perfect timing. Ethan grinned, leaning against the balcony railing. You think that's what this is? Oh, absolutely. I picked up my coffee. The universe is finally working overtime. My phone buzzed again, Lydia calling. I answered this one. Well, good morning to you, I said, smiling into the receiver. Lydia didn't even say hello. Oh my God, Ava, it's worse than I told you. The wedding literally fell apart. I gathered. No, listen. The groom walked out during the reception. Like full meltdown. He and Haley had some kind of fight and then he just left. Took the car. His mom followed him. It's chaos. I couldn't help it. I laughed until my eyes watered. You're kidding. I wish I was. Lydia's voice was breathless, part horrified, part gleeful. Then your mom started yelling at the planner. Uncle Rob was shouting about family honor. Grandma cried. The venue shut down the bar. It was an absolute mess. Ethan sat across from me watching with a smirk. I mouthed, it's happening. Lydia continued, her tone conspiratorial. The best part, they're all blaming you. That made me laugh harder. Of course they are. Let me guess, if I'd been there, I could have stopped it. Exactly, Lydia said, practically shouting. They said if you'd been around, you would have talked sense into the groom or fixed it somehow. Like, what are you, a wedding whisperer? I wiped a tear from my eye, trying to catch my breath. So let me get this straight. They cut me out of the guest list, and now it's my fault. The wedding imploded, yup. I leaned back in my chair, smiling at the sea. That's poetic. Oh, it gets better, Lydia said. Grandma stood up in the middle of everything and said, and I quote, "That's what happens when you turn your back on family. The cosmos doesn't like arrogance." I laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee. She did not. She did, Lydia said between giggles, and everyone heard it, even the photographer. Half the guests clapped. Ethan shook his head amused. Your grandma's savage. She's the only one with sense, I said proudly. Lydia sighed, her laughter fading into exasperation. It's honestly insane, Ava. They're all running around like headless chickens. I think Mom tried to call the groom's family to patch things up, but they told her, "This is your mess now." I covered my mouth, suppressing a grin. Oh my God. I swear it's the best entertainment I've had in years. Well, I said, raising my cup like a toast. Here's to being uninvited and unbothered. Lydia chuckled. You've officially become the family legend. I'm jealous. Don't be, I said, though I couldn't stop smiling. You still have to attend their Sunday brunches. Point taken. We talked for a while longer before Lydia finally sighed. Anyway, I should go. Mom's about to call again and I need to pretend I'm not on your side. Thanks for the update, I said. You've made my morning. You deserve it, she replied warmly. Honestly, I think this is the universe apologizing to you. I laughed softly. Maybe it is. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of waves breaking on the shore. Ethan handed me a fresh drink. So what now? You going to call them back? Nope. He smiled. You sure positive? They created the storm. Let them deal with the thunder. I picked up my phone again, opened Mom's thread, and typed one sentence. Sorry, I'm a little busy enjoying my overreaction. Hope the wedding was fun. Then I hit send, blocked her number, and set the phone face down. The satisfaction was quiet, but deep like a knot untangling inside me. Ethan leaned closer. Feel better, I nodded. Much. We spent the afternoon by the pool, the kind of lazy peace that feels like a reward. I lay on a lounge chair sipping coconut water, scrolling through pictures of Bali sunsets, while the ocean hummed in the background. Every now and then I imagined my family in their perfectly decorated venue, flowers, wilting makeup, running guests, whispering. It wasn't joy I felt, not exactly. It was something calmer. Justice, maybe. I turned to Ethan. You know, it's funny what they always called me dramatic. And now I'm the calm one while their lives are falling apart, he laughed. That's how karma works. It's got your sense of humor. By late afternoon, the sun was melting into the horizon. I picked up my phone again, opened the camera and took a photo of my view, golden sky, calm ocean, untouched glass of champagne. I posted it with a single caption. Sometimes silence is the only reply chaos understands. Within minutes, the likes began to climb. Lydia texted me. Again, you're gonna want to hear what happened next. I smirked, setting the phone down. Of course there's more. Ethan tilted his head. You're not curious. Oh, I'm curious, I said, leaning back in my chair. But not enough to leave paradise. He laughed, quietly clinking his glass against mine. As the first stars appeared over the ocean, I whispered almost to myself. Let them chase the drama. I've already found my peace. And the waves answered, rolling softly across the sand as if agreeing with me. I was sitting under the shade of a cabana, half reading a book, when my phone lit up again. The name flashing on the screen made me laugh before I even answered. Lydia. Let me guess, I said, pressing the call button. The circus is still in town. Her voice came fast, breathless. Oh, it's not just a circus anymore, Ava. It's a full-blown apocalypse. I leaned back, balancing my drink on my knee. Perfect. I've been waiting for the sequel. You have no idea, she said, her tone half horrified, half delighted. So the groom Jason completely disappeared. No calls, no texts, nothing. His family packed up and left the hotel this morning. Haley's been sobbing non-stop since last night. I swirled my straw lazily through the glass. Sounds like a success to me. Lydia laughed, but it quickly turned into a sigh. That's not even the best part. Your mom and Aunt Lisa got into a screaming match at brunch. Grandma showed up in her Sunday best, stood in the middle of the chaos and called everyone cursed. I nearly choked on my drink. Grandma did what she said, and I quote, "You turned your back on family, and now look what the universe gave you, humiliation." Lydia's voice rose as she mimicked our grandmother's tone. Aunt Lisa tried to calm her down, but Grandma just whacked her cane on the table and said, "This is karma for being arrogant." I laughed so hard I had to put my glass down. Oh my God, Grandma doesn't miss. She doesn't, Lydia agreed. And the best part, she told everyone that you were the only one in the family who still had common sense. That made me go quiet for a second. She said that, yep, Lydia replied softer now. Right in front of everyone. A strange warmth spread through me, something like validation but deeper. Well, I said, finally smiling to myself. Better late than never. Oh, it gets better, Lydia said, excitement returning to her voice. Mom's been trying to do damage control all morning. She called Jason's mother to apologize, but Jason's mom told her, "This is your family's mess. Leave us out of it." Then hung up. Beautiful, I murmured. Just beautiful. You should have seen Haley. She lost it. Like full meltdown. Threw her bouquet into the pool. She even screamed at the photographer for capturing her misery. Wow, I said, leaning back against the lounge chair. Sounds like they're really living the dream. Lydia laughed again, unable to help herself. Honestly, I know I shouldn't be laughing, but… No, you should, I interrupted. It's therapeutic. Ethan appeared beside me, fresh towel slung over his shoulder. He caught my amused expression and mouthed family update. I nodded, covering the phone. Apparently the wedding has been declared an official disaster, he grinned. Cheers to that. Lydia was still talking. Now Mom's saying if you had been there, this never would have happened. I let out a dry laugh. Of course she is. Because clearly I have the power to stop runaway grooms through sheer presence. She said you would have handled everything better, Lydia continued. You always do. That's the line she used. I rolled my eyes, staring out at the endless ocean. And yet somehow I wasn't good enough for an invitation. Lydia sighed. Exactly. It's ridiculous. Honestly, I said. Voice soft but steady. It's kind of poetic, don't you think? They wanted a perfect day without me, and that's exactly what they got, just not the version they imagined. Lydia snorted. Haley's going to need therapy after this. Good. Maybe she'll learn that actions have consequences. There was a pause. You're not mad anymore, are you, Lydia? Asked quietly. I thought about that for a long moment. The breeze carried the scent of salt and frangipani. No, I said finally. Not mad, just done. Fixing things I didn't break. Lydia was silent for a beat, then said softly, That's powerful. Ethan handed me a fresh drink and whispered, Tell your cousin I approve. I smiled. Ethan says hi. Tell him he's my favorite by marriage already, Lydia said with a laugh. Will do. We chatted for a few more minutes, her updates growing more absurd by the second before she sighed again. You know Grandma's calling it a curse. She said the cosmos punished Haley for being cruel to you. I blinked, then burst out laughing. I should have invited the cosmos to the wedding. They actually showed up. Lydia giggled. I swear, Ava, you couldn't write this better if you tried. I wouldn't need to, I said. They're doing all the work. When we hung up, I placed the phone face down on the small table beside me. The laughter slowly faded, leaving behind a quiet, deep sense of release. Ethan watched me from the pool, floating lazily. You okay? I nodded, smiling faintly. Better than okay. Do I even want to know the details? Probably not. Let's just say karma's in full performance mode. He chuckled, lifting his glass toward me. To poetic justice. I raised mine in return. To not being needed. The wind shifted, warm and slow. I closed my eyes, letting it brush over my skin. For years, I'd felt like the fixer, the family's silent firefighter, always putting out flames I didn't start. Now I was finally watching the fire burn itself out from a safe distance. As the afternoon wore on, the resort grew quiet. Guests drifted to their rooms for naps or massages. The ocean shimmered with that late-day glow, soft and endless. I felt lighter than I could remember feeling in years. When Ethan came to sit beside me, he looked at me for a long time before speaking. "You don't seem angry anymore." "I'm not," I said simply. "I'm free." He smiled, brushing a drop of water from his hair. "That's a good look on you. I think I'll keep it." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "You realize they're probably still calling you, right?" "Oh, I know." I picked up my phone and opened the list of missed calls again. There were dozens. My mother Haley, even numbers I didn't recognize. It was almost funny now, like watching ghosts trying to haunt someone who'd already left the house. I typed one short message in the family group chat before blocking them all. Maybe next time invite your blessings instead of cutting them out. Then I set the phone down and exhaled deeply, as if the act itself emptied my lungs of years of frustration. The sun dipped lower, painting the water in gold. Ethan reached for my hand. "So what happens now?" Now I smiled. "Now they get to learn what it feels like to fix things without me." He laughed softly. "That's cruelly satisfying." "I know," I said, looking out over the sea. "But it's fair." We watched the horizon in silence, the sound of waves washing away the remnants of old guilt. Somewhere in California, a family was tearing itself apart over a wedding that had fallen apart first. But here the world was calm, and I finally was too. As the last sliver of sunlight disappeared behind the ocean, I whispered almost to myself, "They finally know what it feels like to be left out." Ethan glanced over, smiling. "And how does that feel?" I took a slow sip from my drink. "Like peace." He nodded. "The best kind of revenge." "Exactly." The air cooled as evening settled in. Lanterns flickered along the resort's walkways, casting soft glows on the sand. I stood stretched and turned toward the water. "Coming?" I asked. Ethan rose and followed his hand, finding mine. We walked until the waves brushed our ankles, the world quiet, except for the endless soothing rhythm of the sea. Behind us, the phone on the table lit up one last time before going dark. I didn't look back. The morning after the chaos felt eerily quiet. Sunlight streamed through the open balcony doors, warm and soft, and the air carried that faint ocean scent that had started to feel like freedom itself. I stretched, reaching for the phone on the nightstand, though part of me already knew what I'd find. Dozens of missed calls, messages stacked like bricks, heavy and relentless. Ethan stirred beside me, blinking against the light. "Let me guess," he said, voice rough with sleep. "They've found a new crisis." I smirked, scrolling through the notifications. "Apparently I'm still their favorite emergency contact. Should I make coffee or champagne for this?" "Both," I said, laughing softly. While he disappeared into the kitchen, I sat up, legs tucked under me, and opened the first message. "Mom, your sister's heartbroken. You need to call her. This isn't the time for one of your tantrums. Haley, I don't understand why you're doing this. You're my sister. I need you. Aunt Lisa. The family is falling apart. You can't ignore this forever. Lydia, brace yourself. Mom's planning a family meeting when you get back." I sighed, leaning back against the pillows. "Of course she is," I muttered, "because everything in this family can be solved by a meeting." Ethan walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one and sat at the edge of the bed. "How bad is it?" "Oh, the usual," I said. "Guilt manipulation, emotional fireworks." He grinned. "So they're consistent." I took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through me. They're masters of consistency. If guilt-tripping were an Olympic sport, Mom would have a gold medal. He chuckled. "So what's the plan?" I turned the phone in my hand, the screen lighting up again with another call from Mom. "The plan is to finally choose me." With one deliberate breath, I tapped the screen, held my finger down on her name, and pressed block. The phone made a soft click, barely audible, but it echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Then I did the same with Haley, then Aunt Lisa, then the entire family group chat. Each click felt cleaner, lighter, like snapping invisible chains. Ethan watched quietly, his smile soft. "How does it feel?" I exhaled. "Like peace has a sound, and it's that click." When I was done, I leaned back and stared out at the horizon where the ocean melted into the sky. The world hadn't ended. No lightning bolt, no guilt stabbing through my chest, just stillness. "I used to think family meant forgiving everything," I said quietly. "Now I think it means respecting the limits of love." Ethan nodded. "That's a hard lesson." "Yeah," I whispered. "But I learned it well." After breakfast, I sat by the pool, the phone face down beside me. The sun was warm on my skin, the water glittering like glass. I took out my camera and snapped a picture of the view, the calm sea, the soft white clouds, the untouched mimosa on the table, and posted it with a caption that felt like a final bow. Too busy enjoying my overreaction. Within minutes, the post was live. The likes came in quickly, friends, coworkers, even Lydia. She commented with 3 laughing emojis and one line, "You win." Ethan leaned over my shoulder. "Perfectly petty." "Perfectly peaceful," I corrected. We spent the next hour lounging in silence. I could feel something shifting inside me. Not anger, not sadness, but the quiet weight of clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding space for anyone else's disappointment. Later, as the sun climbed higher, I opened my journal and began to write. It wasn't a letter to anyone, just a reflection of everything I'd carried for so long. They told me being kind meant being quiet. They told me being good meant being useful. But I was never told that kindness without boundaries is just self-erasure. I paused, staring at the words, then added another line. "I'm done being their fix. I'm finally becoming mine." The page looked beautiful when I closed the book. Final. That afternoon, Ethan booked us a dinner reservation by the beach. We walked down as the sky turned orange and pink, the waves whispering against the shore. The table was set with candles and champagne. He poured 2 glasses and raised his. "To freedom," I smiled, clinking mine gently against his. "To freedom. To finally letting go of the people who taught you you'd never be enough." I laughed softly. "And to proving them wrong by being happy anyway." We drank the bubbles, tickling my lips, the sunset painting everything gold. A gentle breeze lifted my hair, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine. I felt whole, truly whole for the first time. After dinner, we walked barefoot along the water. The sand was cool now, the horizon burning faintly with the last trace of daylight. Ethan looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think you'll ever talk to them again?" I thought about it. About Mom's sighs, Haley's apologies, that were never apologies, the years of tiptoeing around invisible landmines. "Maybe one day," I said softly, "when talking to them doesn't cost me my peace." He nodded. "Then you're already ahead of them." We stood there for a while, just watching the waves roll in. When we returned to the villa, I checked my phone one last time. Even with the blocks, new numbers had tried calling. Unknown numbers. Voicemails. I played one just out of curiosity. Mom's voice came through frantic. "Ava, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this isn't funny. Your sister's devastated. You need to stop acting like a child and come home." I deleted it before it finished. Another one from Haley. Her voice was thick from crying. "I'm sorry for how things happened, but please don't shut me out. I can't handle this right now." Delete. The last one was Lydia whispering like she was hiding somewhere. "They're planning to show up at your apartment when you get back. Just a heads up. Grandma thinks it's hilarious." That one made me laugh. Of course she does. I tossed the phone onto the bed and stepped outside onto the balcony. The ocean shimmered under the moonlight, stretching endlessly calm and knowing. For years I had been the one holding everyone else's world together. I'd sacrificed sleep, sanity, even self-respect to keep the peace. But now, as the wind brushed against my skin and the stars blinked quietly above, I realized something simple and true. Peace doesn't need permission. It doesn't need an apology. It just needs a choice. I raised my glass one last time to the horizon. To never going back, I whispered. Behind me, Ethan's voice came soft and amused. Talking to the ocean again. Yeah, I said, smiling. It listens better than my family ever did. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders as we stood there watching the waves break against the rocks below. I rested my head against him, feeling the weight of old memories dissolve like salt in water. I used to think revenge was getting even, I said quietly. But I think it's just being happy in a world that expected me to stay broken. Ethan kissed the top of my head. Then you've won, Ava. I smiled. Yeah, I think I have. The waves rolled in again, slow and endless, whispering against the shore like applause. And for once I didn't feel like the forgotten one. I felt like the one who got free. I was halfway through my cappuccino when the message came in. The subject line on Lydia's text read, "You have to hear this." Grandma went nuclear. I nearly spit out my drink. What now? I muttered, opening the message. Ethan looked up from across the cafe table. That doesn't sound like good news. Oh, it's definitely not for them, I said, scrolling. But for me, probably great. The ocean breeze drifted through the open windows, carrying the scent of roasted coffee and salt. The cafe was peaceful wooden tables, soft Balinese music, tourists whispering over breakfast. And there I was, in a sundress, about to witness my family's next implosion from a continent away. I called Lydia immediately. She answered on the first ring, laughing breathlessly. Oh my God, Ava, you won't believe it. Grandma's speech, if you can call it, that was biblical. I grinned, stirring my coffee. Start from the top. I'm listening. Okay, Lydia, said her voice low and dramatic. Picture this, the wedding fallout brunch. Everyone's tired, hungover, pretending to be civilized. Haley's still crying, Mom's trying to play the martyr, and Aunt Lisa's gossiping in the corner about how the groom's family might sue. I covered my mouth to hide a laugh. This is already amazing. It gets better, she said. Grandma shows up in her pale blue church outfit, pearls, and all holding her cane like a sword. She doesn't even sit down, just walks right into the middle of the dining room and says, "Enough." Loud, like movie loud. Ethan's eyebrows shot up. Oh, I like Grandma already. I put the phone on speaker. Go on. Then she points that cane right at Mom and says, "You raised your daughters to believe love had to be earned. Now look where that got you." Everyone froze. I swear you could hear a fork drop. I laughed so hard I nearly knocked over my coffee. She said that she did. Then she turned to Haley, who by the way looks like she's been crying for 12 hours, and said, "You mocked loyalty, and now loyalty's walked out the door. You cut off your own sister, and the universe just cut you back." Ethan clapped a hand over his mouth, trying not to laugh. Savage, he whispered. Lydia continued breathless. Haley just stared at her like she'd been slapped. Mom tried to calm things down, but Grandma wasn't finished. She said, and I quote, "A family that forgets gratitude will always end up talking to empty chairs." I sat back stunned for a moment. Then I smiled, slow and proud. "Grandma for president," right, Lydia said. People were actually applauding Ava. Half the guests didn't even know what to do. Uncle Rob tried to argue, but then he slipped on a napkin and spilled coffee down his shirt. It was chaos. "Serves him right," I said. "He's been defending their nonsense for years." Oh, and Aunt Lisa threw champagne at him. Ethan nearly choked on his drink. "You're lying." "I wish I was," Lydia said. "It was like reality TV." Grandma just stood there watching it all, then told everyone, "If you had listened to Ava, we wouldn't be in this mess." Then she left, just walked out, like a mic drop. I felt a lump form in my throat, though it came with a smile. She really said that, she really did. For a few seconds I couldn't speak. I stared out the window at the bright ocean and palm trees swaying in the wind. "She's the only one who ever understood," I said quietly. Lydia's voice softened. I think she always did. She just waited until now to prove it. Ethan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I smiled back at him, the sunlight catching the edges of his hair. Tell Grandma I'm sending her something from Bali. A medal, maybe. Make it 2, Lydia said, laughing again. She earned it. What about Mom? I asked. Oh, she's furious. She told everyone Grandma's losing it. But honestly, she just hates that someone finally said what we've all been thinking. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, she wanted a picture-perfect family. Now she's got one cracked glass and all. Lydia giggled. Haley fainted at one point, like full-on fainted. Grandma didn't even blink. That's impressive composure, Ethan said. Right, Lydia continued. Then someone, oh, you're going to love this. Someone yelled, this family's cursed. And Uncle Rob shouted back, no, it's just badly managed. Ethan lost it laughing so hard, the barista glanced over. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. You can't make this stuff up. I know, Lydia said between giggles. It's tragic and hysterical all at once. When the laughter finally faded, there was a moment of quiet. The kind that feels like something closing gently but permanently. Lydia's voice softened. You know, Ava, everyone's realizing it now, how much you used to hold everything together. Grandma said it best, when the healer leaves, the sickness spreads. I looked down at my coffee, the swirl of foam slowly settling. Maybe they needed to fall apart, I said quietly. That's how things heal sometimes. Ethan nodded, squeezing my hand again. Break before rebuild. Exactly, Lydia sighed. I'm just glad you're not there. Me too, I said, smiling faintly. Because if I were, they'd find a way to make it my fault. Already did, she said with a laugh. But this time, no one's buying it. When we hung up, I sat there for a while, letting the sea breeze brush over me. Ethan watched me with that gentle patience of his. You look happy, he said. I'm not happy about their pain, I said. I'm happy about my distance from it. He smiled. That's a beautiful distinction. I raised my coffee cup. To Grandma, the only judge who ever mattered. To Grandma, he echoed, clinking his cup against mine. The waves outside were steady, unbothered by the drama of people. For a moment, I imagined Grandma standing tall, cane in hand, the unshakable force of truth my family had always needed. It made me smile. As the afternoon wore on, we walked along the promenade near the cafe, the sea glittering like shards of glass. Tourists passed by laughing, buying souvenirs. I felt invisible in the best way, anonymous and free. You think you'll ever go back? Ethan asked as we walked. I thought about it. Maybe one day, I said softly. But not to fix them. Just to say hello. He nodded. And maybe bring Grandma that medal. I laughed. Definitely that. Back at the villa, I checked my phone one last time. Lydia had sent a photo. It was blurry but unmistakable. Grandma Kane raised slightly, standing like a queen, while everyone else looked defeated. Underneath, Lydia had captioned it, Your legacy cousin. I stared at the picture for a long time, smiling through the ache in my throat. I guess it runs in the blood, I murmured. Ethan wrapped his arms around me from behind. What does strength, I said, and the guts to tell the truth. We stood there watching the sun sink behind the ocean, its reflection breaking across the water like liquid gold. Somewhere thousands of miles away, my family was arguing, blaming, unraveling. But here the world was calm. My heart was calm. Maybe Grandma was right. Maybe the universe had a way of balancing itself. And as the light faded into twilight, I whispered a quiet thank you to her, to Karma, and to myself for finally walking away. The morning after Grandma's speech, the world felt impossibly still. Sunlight crept through the open balcony doors, slow and soft, spilling over the white sheets. The ocean murmured below, unbothered, timeless. For once, my body didn't feel like it was bracing for something. I made tea instead of coffee and carried it outside. The air was cool, scented faintly with salt and frangipani. I sat down on the wooden deck chair, legs folded beneath me, and watched the horizon where the sky met the sea. The surface shimmered like silk, and for the first time I wasn't waiting for a message, an apology, or an explanation. I was just there. When Ethan came out, hair still damp from the shower, he smiled at the sight of me. You look like someone who finally slept through the night. I think I did, I said. No guilt dreams, no family interventions, no imaginary arguments. He handed me a slice of mango from the tray he carried. Freedom tastes like this, he said, biting into his own piece. I laughed. You're getting poetic again. He leaned against the railing, eyes squinting at the sunlight. So what now you've conquered? Karma earned your peace. What's left? I looked out at the ocean again, living without waiting for the next storm. Breakfast was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a space instead of draining it. I thought of how many mornings I'd started with anxiety, anticipating messages that demanded emotional labor. For years I'd woken up ready to fix, to soothe, to manage. Now there was nothing to fix, nothing to manage. After Ethan went for a swim, I opened my notebook. The pages fluttered in the breeze, half empty and waiting. I took a pen and began writing a letter I knew I'd never send. Dear Haley, I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because I need the space you once filled with anger. You forgot me when it was convenient, and I let you thinking love meant being the quiet one. I was wrong. Love doesn't ask you to shrink. We were raised by a woman who believed that being useful was the same as being worthy. But I'm unlearning that now. I hope you do too. I don't hate you, Haley. I hope one day you find the peace I had to go halfway across the world to find. But if you never do, I still wish you well. Ava. When I finished, I stared at the words for a moment before tearing the page from the notebook. I folded it once, then carried it to the edge of the balcony where a small incense bowl Saturday. I touched a lighter to the paper. The edges curled, glowing orange before fading to ash. As the smoke lifted into the air, I whispered goodbye. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't dramatic. It was release. Later, I decided to walk through Ubud alone while Ethan took a nap. The narrow streets were lined with small art galleries and temples draped in yellow cloth. Scooters passed in bursts of laughter and engine noise, and the air buzzed with life. I wandered into a small gallery filled with paintings of waves and skies. A young woman behind the counter looked up and smiled. You like ocean paintings? They remind me of breathing, I said. She tilted her head thoughtfully. You must have left something behind to come here. I smiled at her accuracy. I did. She nodded like she understood completely. Then this one is for you, she said, pointing to a canvas of a wide blue sea under a pale sky. It's called The Quiet Return. I bought it without hesitation. As I walked back carrying the painting carefully, I felt lighter than I had in years. Every sound, the rustling palms, the chime of temple bells, the laughter of strangers felt like part of a new rhythm I was finally allowed to hear. When I reached the villa, Ethan was sitting by the pool, eyes closed, face turned toward the Sunday. He looked up when he heard me. That's new, he said, nodding toward the painting. It's us, I said, setting it down. Or at least what we found here. He smiled. You look different, Ava. I feel different. I sat beside him, dipping my feet into the water. I think I finally stopped auditioning for love. He reached for my hand. You never had to audition for mine. I know, I said softly. And that's what makes it real. That evening, the resort offered a sunset meditation by the beach. I joined without hesitation. A few others sat spaced apart on the sand faces turned toward the horizon. The instructor's voice was low, almost blending with the waves. Breathe in what you need, she said. Let go of what no longer serves you. As I inhaled, I thought of all the years I'd carried guilt, resentment, exhaustion. As I exhaled, I imagined it leaving me like smoke rising and dissolving into the evening air. The sun sank slowly into the water, gold fading into rose, then violet. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of the waves. There was no noise left in my mind, no echo of old arguments, no need for closure, just presence. Afterward, I walked back barefoot, the sand cool beneath my feet. Ethan was waiting near the path, holding 2 glasses of wine. How was enlightenment, he teased. Quiet, I said, smiling. And it didn't require any apologies. We sat together on the balcony, the ocean dark now, except for the faint shimmer of moonlight. The painting leaned against the wall beside us. I got a message from Lydia, Ethan said after a while. Grandma wants to see you when you're back. I smiled, imagining her fierce eyes and steady cane. Tell her I'll bring her something from the ocean. He nodded. She'll like that. The stars blinked above the water, scattered like diamonds. Ethan wrapped an arm around me, and I rested my head on his shoulder. Do you miss them? He asked. I miss the idea of them, I said after a moment. Not the reality. He didn't respond right away, just tightened his arm around me. That's fair. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of the waves carry me somewhere between thought and peace. I think I whispered, this is the first time I've ever felt like myself. He smiled against my hair. Then I guess Bali did its job. I laughed quietly. Maybe it wasn't Bali. Maybe it was me finally getting out of my own way. The night deepened, the air soft and cool. I stood and walked to the edge of the balcony, staring at the endless horizon. The water shimmered faintly, the moon pulling at its surface like a heartbeat. I thought of everything that had led me here, the exclusion, the silence, the chaos, the collapse, and how all of it had delivered me to this one perfect stillness. Peace didn't roar like thunder. It didn't announce itself with fireworks or applause. It just arrived one morning, gentle and undeniable, like the tide returning home. Behind me, Ethan whispered, "Ready to go home soon?" "Not yet," I said, turning back toward him with a smile. "Maybe one more sunrise." He nodded, understanding. I stood there a little longer, barefoot on cool stone, the sound of waves brushing the shore like a lullaby. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to call. I wasn't running from anything either. I was just standing still, finally whole, finally quiet, finally free. The sky was still asleep when I stepped onto the balcony, the air cool and blue before dawn. I wrapped my robe tighter and leaned against the railing, feeling the faint warmth of the mug in my hands. Below me, the ocean was calm, breathing in slow, steady waves. It smelled like salt and beginning. Ethan came out behind me, rubbing his eyes. "You're up early," he said, voice thick with sleep. "I didn't want to miss the last sunrise," I replied, smiling faintly. "It feels like the kind of day that deserves to be remembered." He leaned beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "No more wedding chaos, no calls, just light." I nodded. For the first time, I'm not waking up bracing for bad news. The horizon began to glow pink, then gold. I could see small fishing boats in the distance, their lanterns flickering as they returned to shore. For years, I'd mistaken peace for boredom. I thought quiet meant loneliness. But as the first streak of sunlight broke through the clouds, I understood it was something else entirely. Quiet wasn't empty, it was full. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle in. You know, I said I used to think peace came after forgiveness, but I think it comes when you stop needing to be understood. Ethan looked at me with a small, knowing smile. "You've been understood enough for one lifetime." "Exactly." Later, as I packed, I folded everything carefully, like closing a story that had already been told. Each dress, each scarf, carried traces of who I'd been these past weeks, someone lighter, unburdened. When I placed the ocean painting on top of my clothes, I hesitated for a moment before zipping the suitcase. That painting wasn't just decoration, it was proof. A reminder that I'd found my way back to myself. Ethan glanced over from his side of the room. "You sure you're ready to leave paradise?" I smiled. "I'm not leaving it. I'm taking it with me." Before we left the villa, I turned my phone on for the first time in days. Messages flooded in instantly, a tide of voices I no longer felt pulled toward. But one stood out: Lydia. "Grandma says she's proud. She keeps telling everyone the family had to break so you could rebuild yourself." I stared at the message until my eyes blurred, then typed back, "Tell her she was right. And thank you for being the bridge when I needed one." Lydia replied almost instantly, "Always. Don't ever give your peace back, Ava. You earned it." I smiled, locked my phone, and slipped it into my bag. Ready? Ethan asked. More than ever. The airport was surprisingly calm. I watched people rushing past with their luggage, the chaos of transit somehow comforting now that it wasn't mine. We sat by the window watching planes take off their tails, vanishing into the clouds. I pulled out my notebook, flipping to a blank page, and wrote one final line. I didn't lose a family. I found myself. I closed it gently and leaned my head on Ethan's shoulder. You ever think we had to go through all of that to end up here? He nodded. Sometimes pain is just the world's way of forcing you to start over. Then I guess I'm grateful for it, I said softly. When our flight was called, I looked out the window one last time. The sunrise had melted into full daylight, now bright and alive. Goodbye, Bali, I whispered. Thank you for the quiet. Weeks later, home looked different. The light through my apartment window was softer somehow, the air less heavy. I'd planted small green succulents on the kitchen sill and hung the ocean painting above my desk. Every time I passed it, I paused. It was my daily reminder that peace didn't belong to a place, it belonged to me. My phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. The preview read, "We miss you." For a moment I just stared at it. Then I smiled, turned the phone face down, and walked away. The world didn't stop spinning because I didn't reply. Ethan called from the kitchen. Dinner's ready, coming. As I joined him, laughter filled the small apartment. It was the kind of laughter that didn't need to prove anything. I realized then that revenge hadn't been the point. Peace had. And I'd won it quietly. After dinner, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered below like constellations, and the air carried a faint hum of distant traffic. I took a deep breath, letting it all sink in the calm. The distance, the life that was finally mine. Somewhere in another time zone, my family was probably still rebuilding their story, rewriting it in a way that made sense to them. But for once, I didn't feel like a chapter they'd closed. I felt like a book they'd never finished reading. I raised my glass toward the sky and whispered, "Zero regrets." And for the first time, I truly meant it. The wind brushed against my face, carrying the faintest echo of waves. I could almost hear Bali again, the soft crash of the sea, the endless rhythm that had taught me how to breathe differently. I smiled, whispering to myself, sometimes peace doesn't mean starting over. It means continuing without the noise. The camera would fade here if this were a story on screen. The soft light on my face, the ocean painting behind me, the sound of quiet music rising. But in real life, it just kept going. Because peace isn't a final scene. It's the choice you make every morning. And if you've ever had to walk away from something or someone to find your peace, maybe you know exactly what I mean. If this story reached you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to choose yourself over keeping the peace for others? I'd love to hear your story. And if you haven't already, stay with us here. There are more stories waiting about letting go, healing, and finding that quiet strength that only comes when you finally stop apologizing for it. Because sometimes revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting free. And I think deep down you know what that feels like.